Software engineers, really good software engineers, right, are probably the most persistent people that you're gonna find in the world. Probably the most persistent people because as software engineers, we have to write code, we have to read code, we have to test code, we have to debug code. Debugging code is actually the
Mm,
the most one of the most tiring process, right?
right.
You have to be really persistent and you have to defend your logic, right, really well, and you have to be very confident, when you're writing the code, and you have to know what you're doing, right?
Hey there, thanks for tuning in to the first episode of the Careers of Millennials podcast. Have you ever thought of doing programming as a career? Chow is a software engineer in the tech company, and I'd love to share with you his passion in programming and what would it take to succeed in this career. Let me know in the comments below on what you think about this podcast, and be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification button to support my channel and bring you more careers of millennials. Jay Chow is a software engineer in the world's top IT networking company. He helps the company modernize its B2B e-commerce software and implement data analytics in the e-commerce engineering team in San Jose, California. Also did 2 summer internships at his current company, one in sales and then in engineering in San Jose, where he is right now. Jay is interested in early in career IT programs, and he mentors interns and recent graduates in the organization. Jay, thank you so much for joining me in this podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me here, Andrew. Pleasure to be here.
What is it like working in Silicon Valley? I think I myself haven't been there. Not many people, I think, have been there before. What's a day like in Silicon Valley, working there especially?
So are you talking about right now when everyone's working from home, or before the COVID situation when I had to go to office every day? Because to be very honest, it's very different. Going to the office and working from home, very different, right?
Hmm.
So would you want me to talk more about pre-COVID days or post-COVID days?
I think you can give us a comparison. What is it like pre-COVID as well as right now when many people are working from home?
Right. Okay. So before the COVID, right? First of all, I think it's important to understand that there's always this saying, right, that the grass seems greener on the other side, right? So many people who do not work at Silicon Valley, they may feel that Silicon Valley is a place where it's very exciting, it's very attractive, it's all grand, people make a lot of money, which is true to a certain extent. But once you start working at Silicon Valley, it's not really that grand on a daily basis. For me, before COVID days, I was working, I think, around 9 to 6 every day. And every day in Silicon Valley, people work and work and work and work, right? It's very different compared to Singapore. There's no public transportation here, for example, so everyone has to buy a car. Most of my coworkers at Cisco right now, they are married and they have families. And besides work, most of my coworkers, they just spend time with family. So it's very different from Singapore. I really miss our hawker food culture.
Yeah,
That's
that's very
something I
good.
really miss, Andrew.
Mhm.
Yeah, so to get back and to answer your question, right, Andrew? So it was the daily grind, right? Basically, before COVID, every day I was spending a lot of my time in the office. I woke up early around 8, had my breakfast. I'm renting a room right now. Drove to office, have meetings. I have my Scrum meetings. I have my coding meetings, my checking emails, coding, and then in the afternoon we have more meetings and more coding. And then I usually end work around 6. And then when I go back home, I have dinner, and by that time I'm pretty tired, so I usually try to rest earlier. Um, after the COVID struck the US, right?
Mhm.
Everyone had to work from home, so people kind of got more isolated, right? When you're stuck at home, there are people who feel like for me, example, right? I'm the type of guy. I'm more of an extrovert person, and I feel more energetic and I feel more lively when I'm around people. So I really like to go to the office, to kind of feel the energy of my teammates, of my managers, of other friends, right? But post COVID, I would say I feel more isolated. I feel more because I do not have like family members with me right now. So sometimes it gets a little more difficult in terms of coping, and we are stuck in this room, and you still have your work to do, right? So I guess it's all about the balance, right? If I were to choose, right, Andrew, I would definitely prefer to go to office to work. But it seems like the situation here in the US is getting from bad to worse with the rising number of cases. So I'm gonna be here working from home for a while.
So Jay, let's talk about your ambition. At the start, you mentioned that in the US, there are great tech companies, and you grew up in what you call a comfortable environment, and yet you had big goals. You wanted to work in the US, you wanted to work in a big tech company, and you basically studied in the US as well. Would you say that studying in the US is more than enough to work in the US? Because if I were to look at your profile, I might think that, well, I think Jay had it easy, right? He's able to study in the US. He probably knows a lot of people there, and that's how he got into one of those big tech companies. Is it enough to get into one of those big tech companies?
Oh, that's a great question, Andrew. So having that good education in the US definitely increases your chances of securing a good job in those tech companies, right? There are people who graduate from Stanford, from Michigan, from Carnegie Mellon with solid computer science engineering degrees, and they do end up in companies like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Cisco, those tech giants. So yes, to a certain degree, it does increase your chances. However, it's super, super competitive here in the US. You have so many international students here in the US, and most of them want to work at Google, right? Most of them want to work at Apple. Most of them want to work at the big tech companies, right? So it's about how you differentiate yourself, right? It's about what you do that is different from the rest of the people, right? It's about the work you put in, right? It's about the networking, right? It's about how you brand yourself, right? And how you deliver results, right? Because to be very honest, in all these high tech companies, results matter, right? So you have to put in the work, and you have to be very disciplined, and you have to work hard and smart, right, to secure a job. It wasn't easy for me, to be very honest, to secure a job back at Cisco. But I'm very thankful for the people I met. Shout out to Arvind, who is our current CEO and also an ACS boy. And shout out to all the Singaporeans who are working here in Silicon Valley. It's not easy at all. Because, Andrew, when you're in Singapore, right? How many people do we have in Singapore?
Well, let's say 5 million, but the working population maybe 1 million, 2 million.
Right. So on a pure statistical and mathematical perspective, you're competing with 5 million people, right? 4 to 5 million people. Mm-hmm. But when you go to countries like the US or China or India, you're competing with hundreds of millions of people, right? So you have a very, very huge talent base in the US, right? So you have to work harder, and you have to definitely make sacrifices, Andrew.
And what are some of the things that you did that you said it requires you to stand out in the competition? What are some of the things that you did, especially about the sacrifices that you made?
So for me, Andrew, I'm a very strong believer in working hard and working smart. So for me, in retrospect, when I look back, I think the differentiating factor was that I put in more work than others. I always believed in not giving up. I always believe in persistence. I always believe in, Lee Kuan Yew values, actually. Whenever I'm going through a tough time, I would always remember Lee Kuan Yew's values and, what he did to help Singapore succeed. And I always try to apply that. So I guess that's what makes me stand out. And, I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to take risk. I'm not afraid to take a bolder step than others, right? I'm not afraid to fail. So I think that's my differentiating factor compared to others. And one thing I think, Andrew, is also very important. Many people, when they see someone who is successful, or I'm not saying I'm successful, but I'm working to that path, right? But when people see a person on the stage of success, right, most people tend to neglect the effort, the pain, the process that person went through in order to achieve that success, right? It's always very easy to see a person like Bill Gates, Jack Ma, Mark Zuckerberg, even Chuck Robbins, right? They see them on the stage there. They're the CEOs making big money, making a big impact. But most people do not see what they have been through for them to become who they are today. So I always think that it's good to put that into perspective. I always believe that never forget your tough days, right? That's how you keep progressing and keep improving.
Right. I think people generally underestimate the kind of hard work that goes behind the scenes because they see someone on stage and they see their title, they see what they're doing, but they generally do not understand or go through the same process as they did, all the ups and downs and the struggles. So knowing that where you are today, and as you look back, you are very passionate to coach and even guide interns and recent graduates about that. What are some of the tips that you would give to them in order to help them understand how they can move forward in their careers?
Yeah, that's a very inspiring question, Andrew. And I always believe that I've contributed and I've benefited from the Singapore system, and it's only my duty to contribute back to help more youths in Singapore to achieve their potential, right? And to maximize their potential and to be really successful in life. So I guess the most important advice that I would give youth back in Singapore is you have to work hard, right? And you have to have something you're really passionate about, right? And chase your dreams and put in the work every single day, right? Have like mini goals, right? Don't have like one single. It's good that you have like a really big goal that you want to accomplish in your life, but you got to set yourself mini goals that will lead you to the big goal, right? So I think that's very important. Setting realistic expectations, keep improving every day. Like, for example, right, Andrew, if you want to be a very good coder, right, and a programmer, there's no way you can be a good programmer from just one day, right? There's no way, right? So for me, I spent like 6 years, right? 6 years mastering my programming skills, right? Every day coding. It's all about practice, right? It's all about putting the time and the effort to master, a skill. Like Kobe Bryant shoots basketball every day, right? It's the same thing. Jack Ma spent a lot of time to build Alibaba, right? So I guess the most important advice, Andrew, is for youths who are listening is to remember Lee Kuan Yew's values, right? I think they're really appropriate, right? just the sheer hard work, and being obsessed with accomplishing your goals. And even if you fail, you get rejected, it's part of life. I did get rejected too. It's normal. It's common to face adversities and to face failures, right? But the most important is, stick to your dream, stick to your passion, and keep driving yourself forward. I'm a very strong believer of making incremental improvements every day, and being very disciplined in accomplishing your sub goals, which will lead to the wider goal.
And Jay, so for youth and job seekers right now in Singapore, right? If they want to work in big tech, say at least in Singapore or maybe in the US, but they probably can't go to the US right now to study like you did. And if they were to form the goal, the big dream of wanting to work in big tech, they would form mini sub goals, such as starting a GitHub, which you did, and getting to know people, the right people in the companies as well. What are some tips that you would give them in terms of networking?
My advice is, there's always a chance, right? If you're really good in what you're doing, people want you, right? There are examples here in the US, right? There are leaders here in the US in big companies who were born in Singapore, right? So it's not impossible. But I guess, the most important thing, right, Andrew, is to really do well in your job, right? And, really, you want to do your job so well that people want you to get promoted. People advocate for your promotion. People want you to move up the corporate ladder, right? So that you can take on more responsibility, so you can contribute more, right? You can positively influence a wider audience, right? So, for those people who have dreams working, in the US, in a high-tech company, take it one step at a time, right? Do really well in your job. And once there's an opportunity to relocate, take it, right? But given that you have delivered, given that you have made a positive impact in the business, right?
And you also sent me this video about sponsorship, and you shared how that has impacted your career. It was a TED Talk that you sent me.
Right.
She was talking about finding someone who would advocate, right? You mentioned just now, advocate for your promotion, someone who would advocate for your success to move up the ladder.
Yes.
How and when did you realize that this is so important in making your career?
Yeah. So Andrew, before I answer that question, sponsorship is earned. So it is earned, meaning that, you have to deliver, you have to execute, you have to do well in your job so that a potential sponsor is interested to sponsor you, right? So on a side note, sponsorships, right, come from mentorships, right? And do you know the difference between mentorship and sponsorship? I think this is something that most people get a little confused about.
Yeah, well, I think mentorship to me, and I've actually looked up the definition as well. What is the difference between a sponsor, a mentor, and a coach? A mentor is someone who has experience in a company, and you just approach them so that they can give you tailored advice, advice. A coach, on the other hand, is not only giving you advice, but is also responsible for your results, right? Think of like the coach of a football match. If the team wins, people will look at not only at the players, they will look at the coach as well.
Right.
A sponsor, on the other hand, is usually kind of like behind the scenes. And they will be basically advocating on your behalf.
They have your back. They basically have your back in those in those high level meetings, they
Right.
actually talk about you. So it's very simple, Andrew. You can think about it this way. A sponsor talks about you. A mentor talks with you. And a coach coaches you, right?
Yeah.
Right. So sponsorship is actually key. You know, I'm not sure if Singapore companies have those programs, but I think it's definitely very important, right, for high performing talents, high performing diverse talents to be leveraged via this sponsorship program.
And so I'm trying to put the pieces of the puzzle here. We talk a lot about hard work, and that's necessary to stand out in the competition. And here we're also talking about sponsorship, meaning finding someone powerful, someone up there in the organization who would want you to succeed.
Right.
And when we put these two elements together,
it becomes very strong force, very powerful.
Right. Yeah. And I think just from my perspective, a lot of people in Singapore work really hard, right?
Yes.
We look at studies, they work how many hours a week? Crazy, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I think in Silicon Valley, people work really hard as well. Right. And sponsorship seems to be quite a widely used program in Silicon Valley, whereas I think in Asia, typically people just wait till someone calls upon you, say, hey, do you want to be promoted? Or people just generally keep quiet until they're kind of called upon for promotion.
Right.
So I think I see a big difference here in the Asia versus the US, where in Asia people generally don't approach their superiors for promotions, whereas what you're suggesting is that we need, regardless of where we are, whether in Singapore or in the US, is that we need to find someone who is willing to sponsor us. How did you find your sponsor, Jay? Share with us.
Yeah, so for me I actually I did not find him. He found me. My sponsor actually started off as my mentor. And as we started talking, we started have those sync up sessions, and I started to explain to him and showcase my work and my execution and my delivery of, for me, the end goal is to deploy my code on production, right? That's where it's really being used, right? So for me, I would say it's critical for early in careers like ourselves, right? Or those people who, recent graduates, right? Or even interns, to be very proactive, right? Nobody's going to give you a fish. You have to earn that fish yourself. Going back to your question, right? It was earned. And keep in mind, Andrew, whenever a sponsor decides to sponsor you, he's putting himself on the line, So in a sponsor-sponsee relationship, the sponsee has to put in more work. And even after you earn it, that doesn't mean that it's all good and happy for the sponsee.
Definitely, you still need to work hard to sustain that reason why you're being sponsored.
Right. And to add something, Andrew, I highly recommend that companies establish sponsorship programs. You can call it whatever you want, right? You can call it a talent development program, or you can call it like a talent diversity pipeline program, or however you want to call it. But I think it's very important to identify and develop high-performing employees. Not only at the bottom, right, but at the mid-level as well, right? You want to have like a comprehensive end-to-end kind of approach to really enable the business and the company to succeed in this hyper-competitive environment.
All right. So let's just take a step back, and you spent about 6 years in programming, right? I think you started, when did you start again after you finished high school? I mean, ACSI?
Right. So I graduated in ACSI in 2010. I did my NS 2011 to 2013, and then I came to the US in 2014. And I've started 2014 till 2020, so it's it's 6 years already. That's a long time. And yeah, I started when I came to the US. I've always been fascinated with computers, right? When I was a kid, yeah, I spent quite a lot of time playing water polo, but I was fascinated with how computers work. And I I also like to play computer games when I was a young boy.
Same.
So was kind of interested, right? How did that game work? How does a computer do what you want it to do, right? And then I started getting very curious, and then I took a introductory computer science course in my freshman year at University of Michigan. And from there it was like just few, right? Like just a natural inclination and a natural desire to kind of like want to take more advanced courses to up my game and to improve my foundation of computer science and computer programming.
And did you encounter any difficulties along the way? Like you felt like, oh man, this is not for me. How did you know that this was for you? Besides your love for computer games, I mean, I love computer games as well, but I didn't get into programming. What kept you going, despite all the difficulties and challenges that you faced?
It's interesting you ask the question. Software engineers, really good software engineers, right, are probably the most persistent people that you're gonna find in the world. Probably the most persistent people, because as software engineers, we have to write code, we have to read code, we have to test code, we have to debug code. Debugging code is actually the most one of the most tiring process, right? You have to be really persistent, and you have to defend your logic, right, really well, and you have to be very confident when you're writing the code, and you have to know what you're doing, right? Just for example, let's say if you are like, I'm working as part of Cisco right now. I'm in charge of our B2B platform, right? So I'm in charge of modernizing our B2B APIs for our partners to use, right? And I'm also working on the back end for a website that shows the operational health of our commerce servers and our incidents. And I'm also in charge of the back end for our B2B API dashboard, right? What if my code just broke a server, and that server is in charge of processing orders? What will happen? Bad things will happen, right? So my point is that as a software engineer, right, there are pros and cons, right, of working as a software engineer. Many people, from what I see right now, many people are studying computer science engineering just for the sake of it, but you really need to have that interest, and you really need to like it. You really have to like coding, reading code, and spending time on it. Otherwise, it would be a very painful process, Andrew. I would say you have to really like it in order to excel in it. You have to be very patient when you're debugging. You can just like sit in front of a computer for like 5 hours straight just to find a bug in your code. And then you realize, oh, I forgot to reset my variable to be 0 in that for loop or in that while loop. And why did I miss this statement? Why didn't I clear this data structure? Or, why didn't I copy this variable into another variable, and all that stuff. But, I would say software engineers, I really love my job right now as a software engineer. And I think it really suits me. It's not for everybody, but, it is a job that is gaining more relevance in the world today. Right. With the rise of software, yeah.
It's gotten so competitive. I think a lot of people want to do programming, right? Because it's all over the news. Tech companies are all over the news, and big data, automation, AI, you name it. Right. All these require code. So yes, I myself have also tried to get into programming and coding, because I studied economics, and we need to use a statistical software that runs on code that you basically write on how you want to treat the data. And debugging really can be quite a nightmare because, man, you just don't know how to make these things work. And even if you fix this bug, then you might break the other part, and
Right.
and you might need to build a new program on top of it just to fix things up.
Right.
So definitely, it takes a lot of I think it takes a lot of mental
Fortitude.
endurance, right?
Yes.
And staying positive and knowing why you're doing this, and just having the desire that you want to cross the finishing line and you want to fix it.
Right. Right. And I have a little bit of OCD when it comes to coding. So like for me, I focus a lot on every line, and I make sure that I'm really consistent in my code, and I make sure I fully understand what each line is doing. It's very important to understand what you're doing, what your code is doing, right? And Andrew, actually I have a question for you. Have you heard of this thing called competitive programming? It's something that is starting to gain popularity across the world.
Yeah.
So, you heard of it?
Yes, I heard of it, and I was quite intrigued by it. I went to take a peek at the questions as well. So competitive programming is basically people who solve insane theoretical questions.
Andrew, those kids, they started programming when they're like, 6, 7 years old.
Oh, even before they are born in.
So I started late in the game. But, there are kids who, start like 11, 12, started very young. That's how they gain such a huge advantage, right? During their teenage years, right? They started early. They gain a lot of practice, right? It's all about practice, right, Andrew? Like at the end of the day, right? If you see many things, like if you want to do well in sports, if you want to do well in business, right? If you want to do well in public speaking, if you want to do well in presentation, it's all about practice, right? Same for programming. If you put in the time and you're really passionate about it, you really want to succeed in it, you'll be a good programmer. There are always so many things to learn, right? For example, for my role right now, when I first joined as a software engineer, a web programmer, right? The learning curve was steep, Andrew. Like I had to deal with so many new technologies, right? Because we use a huge array of technologies. But having that strong foundational background, during those Michigan days and those days at Johns Hopkins, really helped me to learn those new technologies fast and also apply it accurately. So really thankful, for the training I had, for the academic training I had. I know there are many courses that are available on YouTube. There are many open source courses. I do recommend them as well. I have enrolled in multiple courses, programming courses, and there are times where I didn't know how to do something. I just Google it. I just learned it on YouTube. I learned it on Stack Overflow and stuff like that. So my point is, there are just so many learning opportunities right out there in this internet world that we live in right now. So it's how you leverage on them, how you utilize them to the best of your ability, right? So.
And I've also briefly explored the world of programming. There's web development, like you said, and there's the what's the programming that you do on the server? I think it's HTML or something like that.
Right.
And there's Java, and there's a bunch of other stuff. How did you find your niche? How did you find the area that you wanted to specialize in? Because the world of programming is huge.
It's huge. You're right. So I guess it was due to my foundational coursework when I was at the University of Michigan, right? So at the University of Michigan, we start by taking introductory courses. And then one step at a time, we started taking from introductory, we had like more like a medium level kind of coursework. And then we had multiple medium level coursework, and we had multiple advanced level coursework. And we were exposed to very different components of computer science. Like, for example, we were exposed to, I took all the tough courses, right? Because I really wanted to gain that holistic, strong foundation, right? So I took courses in operating systems. I took courses in data structures and algorithms. I took courses in database systems. I took courses in cryptography, right, which is computer security, something I was really passionate about. I took courses in advanced object-oriented programming. That was a really hard course. I took a course in Java programming. So, to answer your question, like, it's really how you make out of your learnings, right? I strongly recommend and encourage those youths in Singapore, right, to kind of get exposed to the, first go and enroll in a computer science degree, right, in NUS or NTU or SUTD, right? Start there, because having, those fundamental coursework, knocking out those fundamental coursework at university is very important, right? Because they teach you like foundational skill sets and thinking that you can apply, in your job, right? And also, strengthen your logic and your mathematical maturity. That's also very important as a programmer, because, under the hood, your computer is just doing binary manipulation and mathematical operation, to perform a task that you as a programmer want the computer to perform, right? In simple terms, right, computer program is just a recipe, right? It's just a set of instructions that you tell the computer to do. And if you tell it in the wrong way, or you want it to do something, but it's not doing something, it's not doing the thing you want it to do, then, that's wrong, right? So, start early, I would say. Be very curious, have a strong thirst to learn, right? Have a never-ending desire to learn as much as you can. I think that's very important for people who are, starting out. I see many people who, during my undergraduate days, right, Andrew, many people study computer science, right? They want to study it because, they think that once they start working, they can make more money, and stuff like that. But they did not really enjoy the process, So we have, like, when I was studying at Michigan, we do have classes called the Weeder classes. Weeder classes are classes that differentiate the people who are going to stay and the people who are going to give up, because there are some courses where you have to do it by yourself, right? You have to write code by yourself. You have to, do projects by yourself. And those classes really filter out people who are really serious, right, in getting a job. And also, I think, practicing your coding for interviews is very important, right? Like, upping your game in coding interviews is super important. So for those people who are interested, right, there's this website called leetcode.com, leetcode.com. There's a website I highly recommend. It's free, and there are so many algorithmic problems, right? Data structure problems that you can practice, right? If you're really serious in being a software engineer, right? So, Andrew, I kind of exposed myself to a lot of different programming concepts and programming technologies. And when I was offered this role as a programmer, I was like, yeah, I have experience with that. And, I'm up for the challenge, and here I am today.
And so tell us a bit more about what happened in that Weeders class. What was that test? And perhaps it's something that we ourselves could apply to ourselves, so that we can be really honest with ourselves, whether it's something that we really like, we can really tolerate the process of programming, versus are we just really doing it for the money?
Great question. So that class, when I was in Michigan, that class was called Data Structures and Algorithms. And it is a Weeders class because all software projects that were submitted to the auto grader were individual projects. And if you copy from someone else or you use code from previous students or online, you're going to get caught cheating and you're going to fail the class, right? So people who really wrote their own code and really enjoyed the process of writing their own code to fulfill a project's specification and requirements succeeded in a class, right? And also the exams were pretty intense, pretty intense. You had to write code on paper. You had to analyze chunks of code, that course was very practical, and I'm sure like our universities back in Singapore, I'm sure they do have courses like this that kind of make the people who are really serious, right, in being software engineers, so that they can rely on this career, right, to feed themselves and their family, right, to stay on, right, and to kind of drive through and apply for jobs, because just graduating from that class is just the first step, right? But once you apply for jobs, you have to do coding interviews. You have to show that you have programming experience. You have to show that you have maturity in terms of your software design, in terms of your testing, in terms of how you think. In terms of data structures and algorithms to solve a coding problem, right? So all these skills, for me at least, were developed when I was in my during my bachelor degree and my master's degree. And obviously for me, I also spent a lot of time outside of those courses to during my internships, right? My internships, I was a software engineer intern twice before I did my first internship at Cisco, and I always joined like computer science events when I was in Michigan to kind of just. When I was in the University of Michigan, my sole goal was to learn as much as I can so that I could be successful in my career.
Jay, there was actually a cheating case in Singapore for one of the introductory. We're talking about introductory. I don't think it was even an advanced programming course in Singapore, right, where because the exam was conducted online, some students were found to be plagiarizing or basically copying each other's code. And the professor discovered that and asked for whoever who did it to own up and to come forward to confess. And some of the people who cheated, they basically say, look, it's really hard. This body is so hard. They give all sorts of reasons, but I don't think it's any excuse. Right.
I mean,
you can't cheat in code in the real world that you're in right now. Can you actually cheat? I mean, in work.
Well, that's debatable. I mean, look, so there are cheating cases everywhere, right? Even when I was studying at Michigan, there were cases of cheating. I saw people like copy other people's code, right? Or getting help from seniors and stuff like that. But if you think about it, right, at the end of the day, like, if you copy code or, you get someone else to help you, is that going to benefit yourself, in the long run? I mean, assume a case where you're tasked with a project by yourself, and this happens all the time in industry, right? You're in charge of a certain functionality or a certain feature for a software project, right? You have basically like two types of projects, right? One is the greenfield and the brownfield. Greenfield means that you're building code from the ground up, right? Brownfield is you are adding chunks of code or adding features to existing software, right? If you're working on greenfield projects, right, there are many times when you have to rely on yourself, right, to write the code. So if you always like copy from people, or you always rely on Stack Overflow or Google and stuff like that, it's gonna be a very painful time when you start working by yourself, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't reach out to people and you shouldn't reach out to other teammates to discuss, but there are times when you need to be by yourself to solve that problem, right? Solve that programming problem and write code that is extensible, that is readable, that is reusable and scalable.
I think what you just mentioned about learning how to write code by yourself is really to understand what every line does, because I've done some programming tutorials like many people have done as well. So what is the difference, in your opinion, between looking at an example, right, and copying it, and then you just tweak some values and say, nah, that's my code, versus writing from scratch. I don't think anybody would really write from scratch other than really hardcore coders like yourself. Do you code from scratch? Do you see the difference between that versus just copying some example? Is that cheating, or is that
Yeah,
cheating
so
yourself, or not?
that's a very good question, Andrew. So, in the real world, right, in industry, copy and pasting code is pretty common. I mean, right, there's always this concept of reusing other people's code, which is it's a good concept, right, in coding, where you wanna write code that other people use. However, there are cases that you have to customize code and write things by yourself, right? So let me give you an example, right? Um, we have databases created and maintained for new types of data, new formats of data, right? And for this new database, right, you have to write new connectors, right? New connectors to those databases, and you have to write new code if new business requirements arise, right? So there may be opportunities where you can leverage and use other people's code, but there will be times when you are not able to do so. Look, as a programmer, there are things that you're not gonna remember everything. That's impossible. It's just too much, right? You're not gonna know everything, right? I mean, yeah, if you have more experience, then there are things that you don't have to look up on Google and stuff like that. But there will definitely be times, where you have to rely on Google searches, and because there's just a ton of resources, really useful resources online. So, like for example, right now I'm coding in Java, and we're using the Spring framework, right? A Spring framework is a very widely used web-based enterprise framework, right? So there are a ton of resources there that I use, right, every day. And I use different tools like Elasticsearch, MongoDB, Kibana, and all this. All these are open source tools, and they have documentations online that I read every day, right? Because there's always new things to learn every day, right? Like Elasticsearch has so many details, and there's just so many things for Elasticsearch, and even for MongoDB, right? So I guess it's just like being able to search for things that you need online is also a skill, right? I would say like you need both, right, Andrew, to be really successful as a coder. I would say, to be very successful as a coder, you need to learn how to look for things you need online. Don't just copy paste, right? You may just copy and paste for the foundational stuff, but you have to change the workings, and you have to change the internals of certain modules, or you have to tweak just to customize, right, code to kind of accomplish your task.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Jay, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And look, I think you've shared some really good advice on how to get started on this career, as well as sustain in this software engineering career.
Right.
It's really hard, like you mentioned, but it takes hard work, takes passion, and it takes having a good sponsor to be able to secure a spot in one of the engineering teams. What are some of the final thoughts that you have for listeners?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's great to be a very good programmer, but we have to always remember that the business drives the programming, or the business drives the technical side, right? We must always keep in mind of the business aspect, right? And we must always understand where our company is heading to, right? You don't want to be working on a technology and spending a lot of time on a technology that's going to be outdated and your company or your business doesn't even require, right? So it's always very important to have the business in mind, right? I think it's very important. Don't lose touch with the customers, right? The customers, the stakeholders, the employees, the business, right? Otherwise, your technology is like your code is useless, right? Your code is only as good as how much value it brings to the table, right? How your applications, your microservices, your platform is aligned with the business needs in terms of satisfying your customers, right? Having that customer-centric thinking as a software engineer and always focusing on the user, right? That's something very important, right? Always thinking from the perspective of the user of your code and in terms of the customers of the business. I think that is a very potent kind of strategy that you always want to get grounded to. How can you improve your code? How can you improve your application so that you can make the lives of your user better, right? What value are you adding to the business, right? Is your code reducing the costs for the business? Is your code increasing the operational efficiency of the business, right? Is your code scalable for the whole company to use? Is your code helping the sales folks, right? Helping the sales folks to get more business, right? Is your code helping HR to streamline the hiring process? All these questions must be put into perspective, right? When you're a software engineer, I think that's when you really add value, right? Don't just be isolated in your bubble, right? And do things that do not contribute to the wider business. I think that's a trap that I see many software engineers fall into. Always be predicting the next move the company is going to take, right? And you want to be aligned and you want to learn technologies that will add business value to the company, right? So, for example, right, Andrew, to close it out, Cisco, we are transitioning from a systems-based transactional business, right, to a recurring revenue, software-based subscription business, right? So the applications that we develop, the microservices that we write, and the platforms that we develop have to be aligned with the shift.
Right. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're working for the company and the business first. Anything that you do in whatever job that you do, even if it's not software engineering, it's all about adding value to the business. Okay, Jay, thanks so much, and I'll see you again soon.
Cool. Thank you.
Hey there, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Careers of Millennials podcast. Let me know in the comments below on what you think, and be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification button to support my channel and bring you more Careers of Millennials.